we're an information medium. It's our job to present information to people and to vet it out as the best that we can, the facts.
Mhm.
Um, the problem now is there are so many different sources where people get their, I'm going to say, get their truth.
Welcome to the Next Level Journalist, where you will hear from some of the best journalists in the business or who have been there, done that, and willing to share with you what they've learned so you can get better, faster. My guest today is a longtime TV journalist, recently retired after 39 years in the business as a photographer, a reporter, an editor, producer, assignment editor. Mike Taylor, did I miss any roles? I'm sure I did.
Well, let's see. If you're talking about strictly television business, I guess it's pretty close to 40. I also did a year in radio.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I counted 41 years in news altogether. So
Wow.
a lot of different roles for sure.
Okay. Within a newsroom, did I hit all those roles?
Let's see. Photographer, reporter, was one man band. I weekends for a while. I produced weekends. Assistant news director, assignment manager,
Okay.
reporter again. I think everything you can probably. I swept the floors for a while. I changed the oil in the cars.
That's great. And you know what? That's a big reason I wanted you on here, so you can add that perspective or perspectives, if you will, about what it takes. Because you saying that you were a one man band, you were probably a one man band before the one man band was a everyday role now in a newsroom.
Yeah, well, maybe, but back in the 80s, we had a lot of one man bands, and then we
Okay.
away from it. And then at one point, consultants suggested we get back to it. And of course, they're now called multimedia journalists or MMJs. But
Right.
and we
Okay.
certainly aren't, we all weren't men back in the 80s either. There were some female one man bands.
Sure. Let's be. Don't have to be politically correct here. It goes without saying. Plenty of women out there more than capable of doing the one man band. Thank you for pointing that out, Mike. Okay, Mike. Let's talk a little about your experience in TV. Take us back to why TV and how you broke into this industry.
Okay. So in high school, I guess my two favorite classes my senior year of high school were journalism. I was on the newspaper staff and speech. And, I did some plays and that type of thing. And I thought, what would marry those two types of things? And I really did enjoy the journalism aspects of it. So I went to Eastern Kentucky University and majored in broadcasting. I actually went right in with that as my major, stayed with it all 4 years. I didn't go the popular undecided route, and then graduated, got into the business, and stayed in it for 40 plus years. So I guess it was what I really wanted to do. At Eastern Kentucky University, I did a lot of different things as far as the on-campus news shows. I directed them on the production side. I produced them on the news side. My second semester of my senior year, I took a college internship at WKYT in Lexington. And I'll talk a little bit about internships as we go along here, because I actually, in the last 20 years of my career, I actually coordinated all of the college interns in the news department at WLEX. And so I think that's really, really, a really important thing to talk about as we talk about how to get into the business. So that was a great experience for me. It was a different time, at WLEX, we didn't allow interns to be on the air. We would let them do about anything else, including learn to shoot, edit, everything else. We just didn't want to put someone who was unpaid on television. But back in the 80s, things were a little different. It was actually 1980, the spring of 1980, and at WKYT, they allowed me to go out with the weekend crew and shoot and edit and voice and do packages. I have some of those on my YouTube channel that are pretty spectacular, I have to say. It's pretty bad, but I saved all of them. I really, really wanted to get into the business, and so bad that after I graduated, I didn't have a job, even though I'd sent out a number of tapes and resumes, which was a lot harder back in the 80s, because you had to buy a 3/4 inch tape, which wasn't cheap for a college student, and then mail them out to all these different stations, which you may or may not get back. So it was a much more expensive proposition than just popping something on YouTube as it is today. But anyway, I didn't have any luck. But that summer, the news director at WKYT offered to stick around, work for free. probably something people wouldn't be thrilled about today, but I was pretty excited because I got to work on my reel and do some reporting on the weekends there. And I actually, when the weekend reporter took a couple weekends off for vacation, I went to the news director and I asked him if I could fill in for a couple weekends and get paid for it. And he graciously allowed me to do that. So that was my first paycheck in news. Looking back on it after being in management for so many years, I thought, at the time I thought, wow, I must have really impressed him. But I think, looking back on it, he probably just didn't want to ask anyone else to work weekends. So I did that. It was a lot of fluff news, car shows, horse shows, some pretty funny stuff. I actually covered the Lexington Herald-Leader moving into their new building in Midland. Back then I have that. So there was a few things I got in there, but mostly it's pretty fluff. After that, it didn't work out that I got a job there. So I actually did 2 weekends as a radio DJ, which I'm going to tell you I was really bad at. I did that at WEKY in Richmond. And then I got word from one of my college professors that there was an opening for a radio news director at WWKY in Winchester. And they hired me almost immediately there. It was a job where they paid a minimum wage, which, if I recall, was about $2.90 an hour. Yeah, and they paid me salary, so 40 hours a week. That was what I got at $2.90. But to be fair, they didn't make me work more than 40 hours a week. They just, in fact, told me I could just record my afternoon newscast and go home. But I was anxious to learn, so I probably worked about 80 hours a week. I went out every single night covering local meetings, getting sound bites. They didn't require that, but I wanted my newscast to be good. I made sure any stories I did got on the AP wire because I wanted my name out there. I still wanted to get into television. I drummed up a few extra projects for myself. I did play-by-play for Clark County basketball for that year, and actually did the region tournament that year. I went to the high school coach at the time, who was a guy named Lake Kelly. I don't know if you remember that name, but he was one of Eddie Sutton's assistants at one time. He was the high school coach there, and we did a coach's show. So, it was a great experience where you can make a lot of mistakes and get away with it. So, but then I got word again from the same college professor that there was an opening. Actually, she was calling to tell someone else that there was an opening at WLEX for a photographer. And she knew I wanted to be a reporter, so she really wasn't passing that on to me. I was like, wait a minute, I just want to get in the door. So I called the news director at the time, a guy named John Ray. They were building a new team at that time. They had just hired a new anchor, a female anchor to join that team, and a new weather guy, and a new sports guy named Alan Cutler, who started there in 1980, about a month and a half before I did. So, but anyway, I called the news director. I said, hey, I hear you have an opening for a news photographer. I said, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I am not a photographer, but I do know which way to point the camera. And he laughed and he said, that's kind of funny because that's about what I'm paying. Why don't you come on in for an interview? So we really hit it off, and he knew what I wanted to do, but he wanted me to get my foot in the door and gave me a chance. And, I am glad I did that because it taught me so much about the use of video in reporting and the proper shots to get. The reporters, for the most part back then, edited their own stuff anyway, so I learned a lot of editing. Kind of a funny story, and I've teased him about this for years, is I actually was Alan Cutler's first sports photographer, and he claims he doesn't remember it, but the trick was after I'd been there about 3 or 4 months, the weekend, we only had 6 photographers at the time, and one-man band who worked weekends, and he was the only photographer on the weekends. He shot all his stuff, he reported, he shot sports, he shot news, and he left. And the news director came to me and said, well, here's your opportunity. You want to do this? Go for it. You can put together packages, do what you want on the weekends, but you got to shoot everything. And so I took that job, and They needed someone to shoot UK football and basketball that season, and I ended up doing it. I shot all the UK football games this was the end of 81. I shot most of the 81-82 basketball season, and it was, Kyle, is very different than when you were shooting. We actually got to sit. In fact, there were only 4 of us there. If you think about this, this is how much changed. Now, how many news and sports outlets are at UK games?
Oh my goodness, yeah, dozens for
I
a
mean,
press conference.
Yeah, it's crazy. And back then, it was me, WKYT, Channel 36, WTVQ, and the Herald Leader. We were the only ones covering the games. Like, no one else was covering. They weren't live on TV. So, we'd rush down there, and we'd have a competition to see who could get there first, because the person who got there first got to sit on the mid-court stripe on the floor. And so we were right there. It was just 4 of us. So they let us sit there. Of course, now if you did that, it'd be a night. I only recall tripping Sam Bowie once when he ran out of bounds. But now if you did that, players would be falling all over everyone. But then we got to sit there. And so I got to shoot all that. I tell Alan that I was the best sports photographer that he ever had, because right now we have nothing to play 3/4 inch video on, and he can't go back and look. And I'm sure I was one of the worst, but I enjoyed it. And I grew up a UK fan, so it was a kind of cool thing to get to do. But still wanted to be a reporter. And I kept working at that. And then, this is the thing I tell people. Sometimes you just have to take the opportunity and be in the right place at the right time. In February of 82, WLEX lost the Cincinnati Reds contract. And it was a pretty big financial blow for them at the time. And they came to the news director and said, hiring freeze, you can't hire anyone else. The next week or 2 reporters left. One went to Atlanta, one went to Mobile, Alabama. And the news director came to me and he said, you want to be a reporter? Congratulations, you've got both jobs. I need you to cover the General Assembly in 1982. And I was thrown right into the middle of it. John Y. Brown was governor. It was, I don't remember if it was overwhelming. I just remember it was a lot. And I dove right into it. And that started my full-time reporting career right there. I didn't have to shoot anymore after that. And that was probably fortunate for, I'm sure I wasn't the best photographer in the world, but I do have some of the video. It's viewable.
Yeah. Well, no, I love it. Like you said, timing it's big, but if you don't take that initiative, it doesn't work out that way. So I love that you pointed that out. So you get your crack at being a reporter.
Yep.
What got you back behind the scenes again and more of a management role? What spurred that? So
I was a reporter for about 3.5 years. I even, at one point, the weekend anchor left, and I asked if I had been filling in back then we didn't have a sunrise show. We had just cut-ins at 7:25, 8:25. They were very brief, the ones they do during the Today Show. And I had been filling in, anchoring those, and the weekend anchor left, and I asked if I could fill in, or maybe even apply for the job. So I actually filled in I'd filled in a couple times before, but I probably filled in for about 4 months. And that was very different too. That was, you were the weekend anchor. You ran your own teleprompter. You edited your own show. You produced your own show. And one day I shot a package and about 4 or 5 VOSAGs and an EKU football game, and came in and anchored the 11 o'clock news. But that was a pretty humbling experience. A little story to go with that. The first weekend that I anchored at 11 o'clock news on a Saturday night, there was no 6 o'clock news, just 11 was all we had. So I'd gotten everything together. I felt pretty good about it. I was a little bit nervous. We had a 10:30 live update from the newsroom. They punched me up, and all I had was a preview monitor, and I didn't realize I was on. And so I kind of was doing this number. You've been there, right? Am I on the air? I don't know what I'm doing here. I stumbled through it for about 30 seconds. And then the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it sounded like maybe 4 frat boys laughing their asses off. How in the world did you get that job? I would just, those are the things you just got to put aside and move on, because in 30 minutes I had to newscast. So, but I did that. I didn't get that job because they said I had too much of an accent. That's the station manager said, you got a little bit of an accent. I'd rather, you too much. I grew up in London, Kentucky. I actually went to school in Seymour, Indiana until I was in 3rd grade. So I really didn't have much of an accent in London until I got to London. And I guess I learned it there. And then going through Eastern Kentucky University, I was trying to get rid of it. But I lost a lot of it in radio. I really worked on it hard. But, I could have been really discouraged by that. I went back to reporting, but instead I went and found a guy at Eastern Kentucky University to give me some voice lessons to help me work out some of the small things that were still in there. Actually, he told me, he said, I really don't hear much. He goes, but there's a couple things we can work on. So I think that's a lesson for people. Sometimes people get discouraged with that and just, they'd be done.
Right.
I've actually told some reporters in the past that they need to work on some stuff like that, and they just got discouraged. But, you should always just continue to work to get better or whatever you're doing. But anyway, so we started having kids. I have 4 and working on our 8th grandchild now. So our families are both from the London area nearby. At the time, we were wanting to stay in the area because my wife at the time had a job with the state. She needed to work there for a while. So the assignment editor left at the time, and they came to me and asked me if I'd be interested. This would have been in 1985. And I told him I was. For one thing, I had a couple kids, and I also, there was a salary increase, not by a lot, but a bit of a salary increase. So I did that for about 3 years. And there was a little bit of turmoil in the newsroom. I won't talk too much about that, but a little turmoil in the newsroom. And the general manager called me into the office, and he kind of asked me, the 2 people that were at odds with each other, whose side I was on. And I just kind of looked at him kind of strange and said, I'm on the side of the newsroom. And he kind of shook his head like, what? Anyway, the news director left within a month of that. And he called me back in and he said, I like your answer. You're now assistant news director. You're getting a $5,000 raise. You're running the newsroom for the next 8 months until I find who I want. Again, thrown in. This one I was thrown in way over my head. But again, a great experience getting to kind of work with everyone in the newsroom, all the different people, and kind of hone some of my management skills. And I stayed assistant news director for a while. Into the next news director kept me as assistant news director. Then the next news director decided he wanted his own assistant news director. I went back to running the desk. And interestingly, in 1993, I guess, they were trying a bunch of different things at the station. They wanted to just try to be a little bit different in what they were doing. And they came to me and asked me to go back on the air, back to reporting. And again, that was a demotion. They didn't cut my salary. I continued to do a lot of things I've been doing in management. But, I was a little upset about it, but I thought it through, and I thought, I really love reporting, and they're going to pay me the same amount of money. So it might be fun to see if, how well I do at it now. I had a beard that I'd grown for, I was in an Easter pageant. And I said, well, let me shave my beard off and I'll go back to reporting. They said, no, keep the beard. We're trying to be different. So I actually reported for almost a year, 93, 94, with a full beard. And I discovered something. 8 years later, I was much better live than I was. I was much more relaxed. I actually saved all my stuff that we still had at the station when I retired from there. And I was looking through it and I was going, I actually was better than I was the first time around. I don't have all the video from in the 1980s, but I think just with some maturity and a lot of the things that I'd gone through. But then they were having some more turmoil in the newsroom, and they couldn't get anyone to run the desk. And they came back and asked me if I would fill in for a few days. After I filled in a few days, they were like, "You're pretty good at this. You should stay here." I'm like, "It wasn't my idea to leave. I'm happy to go back." So I stayed. We finally ended up with the news director that was there for 20 years. So you worked for Bruce Carter. I got to do a lot of different things during that time period. I got to, take a team of 6 people to cover the inauguration of Barack Obama in Washington for 4 days live. I got to lead teams to, the 3 different Final Fours. Of course, 19 derbies on top of all of the stuff that we covered. We became very aggressive in our news coverage in terms of really going after everything and became number one. I also, in 2000, they asked me if I'd start coordinating the our college internship program. And I always enjoyed working with young people, so I was happy to do that. And I can't possibly come up with all the names, but probably hundreds of interns came to the station because I would take as many as we could get. I can name drop here. I had a high school intern by the name of Pamela Brown, who's now a CNN correspondent.
Okay.
Some of those interns are all over the country, and most of them were college students. We didn't take many high school students, but someone asked if we would take the former governor's daughter, and we were like, yeah, sure. Anyway, but yeah, it was an amazing experience, 40-year career, and I still managed to raise 4 kids and all that.
Yeah, and I certainly get that family work-life balance. It's tough being on air because you are, there's not much of a balance. So been there, done that as well, Mike. What about, someone remarked on one of my older videos on here saying, we want to hear from someone like an assignment editor and someone who, is behind the desk, just like you talked about. Explain to us that role and what all goes into that, like from your daily routine to, how you had to manage so many different people, personalities, and just working amongst everybody. So tell us about that position in particular.
So I don't know what you mean by personalities. Are there a lot of different personalities in the newsroom?
Not typically in news, but just our station was unique, right? We had a couple personalities.
It's a unique kind of leadership position. You're not completely in charge of everything, but you're certainly a part of the team. And I discovered something kind of early on with the first news director I worked with. I discovered that it seemed to me that news directors were pretty bad at doing schedules. And so I volunteered to do the schedules, and actually ended up for most of my time up until really the last year when I started letting them farm things out. So, because I knew I'd be retiring, doing all the scheduling we ended up with at 1.70 employees. So that was a lot. And it's a lot of juggling with that. But, the thing I figured out about that was if I did the scheduling, I knew who was there. If the news director did the scheduling, I was kind of guessing and I wasn't sure who I was getting. So I kind of took over that. So, the typical day, I would come in pretty early. I'd usually be the first manager in, and I'd sort of go through all the different things. And it really changed over the years. I mean, think about it. Back in the 80s when I'd come in, at 8:30 every day, I'd have a stack of, snail mail this high, and I'd just have to open all the letters and go through all the press releases. We didn't initially, when I started, even have computers. The first thing they computerized in the newsroom was the assignment desk. That was probably 1989. So I was one of the first people to actually be on a computer and using that for assignments and different things. But I mean, there weren't wires coming in that way. The wires were on a teletype. We were typing on manual typewriters when I started, and then eventually we thought we were big time. We got electric typewriters. So, but they eventually did computerize the entire newsroom, early 90s, and so that really changed how we would get information in. As the internet kind of developed, we would start looking for stuff on the internet. We'd get emails. We'd get, eventually Facebook messages, and it really is one of those things that really changed a lot over time. But it'd be my responsibility to come in and sort of weed through all of that, and the phone calls, and whatever other means of communications people might have with us to try and determine what might be going on for the day and what might be a good fit for us. We really hit it hard in the early 2000s, where we started hitting with the slogan coverage you can count on, where if there was anything breaking, we were on it. So it's kind of crazy. We would lay out a plan. Here's our 7-8 reporters for the day. Here's where you're going. And literally every 5 minutes we would change it because something else would be happening. So it was always, our favorite line was, hey, change of plans. So I guess reporters heard that from us a million times. But so then it'd be my responsibility to communicate that, to coordinate reporters and photographers who was working together, where they were going, how they were going to get there. One of the things I'm really good at organization. It's one of the skills I know I have. I'm also an avid traveler, and I'm very good at geographically where things are, so I could get people where they needed to go. When GPS started, I often had to convince people, like a name you'll know, Rob Cook, to stop following his GPS because it was taking him to the wrong place. Let me tell you where you're going. So, you know, there was a lot of elements like that. And, you know, you have to deal with all those different personalities. I mean, all kinds of different personalities. Certainly, you know, I heard Alan talk about ego. I never really noticed that he had one.
Yeah, no, not
But,
Alan.
you know, it just depends on the personality. And you have to learn all those different personalities and the best way to handle them. So that's a part of the job. I think if I had been not flexible with how I handled different people, I probably wouldn't have lasted 2 years in that job, much less almost 35 as assignment manager. I think I read back, you know, this is maybe back in the early, maybe late 80s, I was reading a thing that said most assignment managers or assignment editors lasted about 18 months was the average. So
Wow.
I should, but you know, I always looked at it as I was just reporting for the entire station. So reporting was my skill set, and that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah, how about navigating that position? You know, you talk about having to go through so many different, at least, you know, back in the day, you know, how, you know, difficult it was when you had that stack to go through. But now you have, you know, well, not anymore, but, you know, when you were even in the business, this quote unquote fake news and all these other, you know, the instantaneous news of social media. Like, what's that process like to navigate through and try to, you know, basically say, hey, this is what we're covering, and, you know, and how to filter out what's accurate, and just in this fake news era, like what was it like to navigate that for you, you know, from your experience?
Sure. So, you know, the term shoot the messenger way predates the term fake news. So we've always had some of that. It's just a little easier for people to voice how they feel about things, or how they think something is wrong with social media and email and, you know, messages and stuff like that. I think they don't feel like you're talking to a human being, but they are. Everybody in the news, and some people take it pretty hard. It's you see people that read some of the messages, and some of them can be pretty rough. I mean, to the point of, you know, talking about they wish you would die, you know, that type. You really have to have a thick skin in this business. You have to be able to still do the newscast 30 minutes later after a bunch of frat boys laugh at you on the phone. And you still have to be able to do the news after you get a bunch of emails of people calling you fake news. We're an information medium. It's our job to present information to people and to vet it out as the best that we can, the facts. The problem now is there are so many different sources where people get their, I'm going to say, get their truth. One of my favorite lines, and I used to have this on my Facebook page, I don't know if I still do, and a couple people were like, well, that didn't make any sense. I was like, oh no, it makes sense. One of my favorite lines from Don Quixote is, facts are the enemy of truth. Of course, you know, he was he was pretty nuts, but that was one of his lines. When I saw that line, facts, I said, oh my gosh, that is perfect. I said, because everybody has their own truth, but the facts don't always match up. You know, I mean, I tell people there's not just two sides to every story. There's 12 or 20. There's you know, everybody has their own version of this or that. You just have to look at what you can factually identify, go with it, know you did your best.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, every single person has a different worldview. So when you bring that to the table, you're right. There are so many different, you know, truths out there, right? So that's good stuff, Mike. What are some other lessons you learned that you can share for TV journalists in general, not just people trying to break through or, you know, trying to avoid mistakes along the way, but, you know, things that you think you learned that, you know, any journalist could, you know, apply, whether that be a photographer, an anchor, reporter, anything that come to mind?
This is the number one thing that I've said to a lot of different people over the years and all different levels of jobs in the newsroom is get a life. Too many people, I watched some of the other people that you've talked to, and I heard some of them say this, you know, it can be an all consuming business where you can't really disconnect. You're like always involved because news is always going on. I couldn't have stayed in the business if I felt that way. Come the weekend, I could disconnect. I could tune news out for the weekend. It's not going anywhere. I can read it Monday morning and get back in it and do my job. Now, if there's a big story going on, I would be involved. I would want to be involved because, that's just part of the nature of it.
I remember being in it, and the first thing I had to do was check Twitter. The last thing I did when I was, before bed was check Twitter. I mean, it was for me 24/7. But as I had a family, and the family started to grow, it became obvious to me what my priorities needed to be. And ultimately that meant me leaving, the business. Some people obviously still stick around and raise a family. But you're right, that disconnect is critical for if nothing else, your mental health. I mean, to be plugged in the whole time, you're going to be, cutting corners somewhere else. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And part of my thing is travel. I got my 50th state last year and been to 25. And I took my kids a different place every year, two vacations a year. And I didn't read my emails while I was on vacation. I figured they weren't going anywhere. I wasn't deleting them. I could read them when I got back. It wasn't like I was going to solve any problems from, the rim of the Grand Canyon back here in Lexington. Someone else is paid to do that while I'm on vacation. So you got to do that. And as you meet, as you do that travel and do all those different things, it makes you a better news person because you know how other people think.
No doubt. And that's something my wife and I are actually looking forward to doing, starting this summer, doing some more traveling, just to be a little more cultured, and that's so cool. 50 states. Wow. That's pretty impressive. I got a long way to go to catch up with that one. Mike, I know we've been on here for a while and we can go down a number of different rabbit holes, but is there anything else that you want to talk about before we jump off here? Anything that you want to mention, whether it be advice or tips? I know you mentioned interns earlier on. Anything else that you want to share that you feel like we need to address?
Yeah, well, we talked about internships. Like I said, I coordinated that program for about 20 years. The station now is owned by Scripps, and Scripps actually has a policy to pay their interns. We actually just did it for college credit. Took over. But different stations have different policies on that. But find something. If you're in college and you feel like you want to get into the business, find something where you can get immersed at least a little bit into the business you think you want to be in. It will make a huge difference. I did it. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I've had interns come in and they weren't sure. And they, I would be like, keep an eye out. Some of them came in and said, I want to be on TV. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But do you want to be a journalist? And someone would come in and they would see other jobs in the newsroom and they were like, I don't know. I never thought about producing. That's kind of cool. You get to write the stories and assemble the newscasts, or maybe I'd like to be a photographer. But, others would come in and go thinking they wanted to be in the business and they would leave going, wait a minute, I got to work holidays. Starting pay isn't all that great. I may have to go to, Butte, Montana for my first job. Maybe I'll do something else. And, they may not have known that if they hadn't done the internship.
Right.
They something they didn't enjoy. So really a good way to, number one, find out if it's what you want to do. And number two, meet some people and make some contacts that can help you.
That's great. And I remember, when I was working there, like you mentioned earlier on, how the interns literally got their hands on the equipment, got to edit, got to shoot, got to practice doing stand-ups. I mean, it was an invaluable experience. So, yes, obviously if you can, get in the door somewhere, that was such a unique opportunity when I was in Lexington, because when I was an intern in Cincinnati, 2005 or 6, I basically sat there and logged, and archived things. I saw how things were done, but at LAX 18, it was pretty neat how they allowed the interns that hands-on experience. So, to reiterate that, it was a incredibly valuable experience for anyone who could get in the door there and start making connections.
Right. It's a good way to start. Anything you can do like that to make those connections. And again, be willing to do whatever.
Yep.
Even if you only just know which way to point the camera, that might be a way to get in.
So Mike goes from just calling up and saying, I know which way to point the camera, to climbing that ladder within LAX 18. Mike Taylor, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today on the Next Level Journalist.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
And thank you for checking out this channel. If you found this content beneficial, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone you think might find it beneficial as well, because this channel was simply started and created to serve you, to help others grow, to learn how other successful TV journalists do or did it. So take what serves you so you can get better faster and reach your next level.